I'll try to be as quick as I can, but want to answer any questions, or if there are other things that are not on this update that people have questions about, I'll absolutely follow up and find the answers to those questions too. So yeah, if folks click on that link, it looks like most people are. I've just got a couple things to share with you. And the first is that I like to say it this way: the car is back in drive on the new IEP and IFSP statewide system. We, for the last 30 days, we had an RFI, request for information, posted, and we got responses from 7 vendors giving us information about existing systems or potential to build a custom system for Iowa for IEP and IFSP management. And so we had a stakeholder group that met on the 13th to review those responses, and it was a multi-mix stakeholder group that I think I know there was some folks from your area that came in, and we were not really scoring those because it was a request for information, not a request for proposal, but we were really looking at what are the features that we really liked, what are the things that might be missing, what might inform what we ask for in a formal request for proposal. And so today, our internal DE team is meeting this afternoon to synthesize all of that feedback that we got from we had a lot of different perspectives, stakeholders from AEAs, LEAs, and the DE at that meeting on the 13th. And there was lots of things brought up that we hadn't thought about, lots of ideas. And so today we're moving forward with our internal office here towards a request for proposal. So we're still really hopeful that early winter, January probably, would be reasonable to think that we could have an RFP posted for our system. So more on that, and we will continue to monitor and work with the folks here on whether this is going to be a special education management system only, but that would link to the bigger data management system once we figure out the new direction for that, or if we will be proceeding this winter with an RFP for a comprehensive system that it encompasses both special education and the general education data management. So those are the next steps. I'll know a lot more after this afternoon, and we plan to send some information out to the field once we have those next steps. Okay, so any
Amy?
questions right now about that part of it, the IEP or IFSP?
Amy, I do have a question about the RFP.
Sure.
What kind of timeline do those usually have? Can you, ballpark what that might look like?
Yeah, most likely it would be posted for 30 days again. Within that window of 30 days would be when we need to respond to any questions that come from vendors. And then once that came down, we plan to repeat the process of having a multi-disciplined and multi-layered stakeholder group. But that would be a more formal review process because that includes scoring and some other things, because we are then looking to select a vendor. If we have, as long as we have a vendor that we feel like can meet our needs.
Okay.
So, yep, so we're still talking like for sure this winter to early spring of being able to begin development with a vendor.
Awesome. Thank you.
So it's really nice to know. We were really in pause there. We were really in park for a little while, but we're definitely back moving on that system. And we know that we don't want to, the urgency is great, right? Because our current system is, to say it bluntly, it's going to crash eventually. It doesn't have the capacity to sustain our needs. But at the same time, we don't want to move so fast that we don't end up with a really quality system that's going to be better for practitioners, better for families, and ultimately better for kids. So that's where we are with that.
For sure. Thank you.
Okay, and then the next thing, I know lots of conversation out there around what's happening with Chapter 41, which is those the graduation memo that is to be coming from the DE. And on November 14th, the state board gave their notice of intent to amend you can see the rule there, but basically Chapter 41, which is really about what constitutes a diploma and what the graduation requirements are around that. And so you can, I've linked the actual Chapter 41, the language there that the state board is reviewing, and you can see, you know, the kind of the two main takeaways really are that 4333 plus PE is a non-negotiable. It will be required for all students to receive a diploma, and that the 4333 does not mean specific courses or units from a state level. Now, obviously, different districts have different requirements for graduation, and that's still going to be able to be the case at a local level. But in order to obtain a diploma, and there will only be one way to obtain a diploma, not through completion of IEP goals, but through the completion of 4333. So there'll be a lot more information coming around that. Can't make a lot of comment right this minute because, as you can see, that has been proposed. The language there is in that document that I've linked, the proposed language changes. And that is right now up for written comment up until January 8th. And so I encourage anyone who has any comments or feelings about that to email those to Thomas. And I can tell you that I met last week with the Des Moines Metro directors and shared this information, and I know that they have submitted a written comment around, because you can, in the language, it tells you that by 2021, the graduating class of 2021, which is this year's current ninth graders, that this is supposed to be at full implementation. The Des Moines Metro directors had some concern about that because those ninth graders are already partway through a year. And so that would be an example. I'm certainly not coaching you on any kind of comment. I'm just sharing with you that that was one of the things that they were the most concerned about, is that in that language, in the document, it does indicate that the current ninth grade class, full implementation by 2021. And so, but along with the opportunity for public comment, there is also an official memo being released. I was hoping to be able to share that with you today because Barb and Thomas told me it would be late November, and this is a pretty late November. But so I'm guessing that that's going to be in the next week or so, though, that will be released. It was waiting for the public comment or the recommendation to amend to come through, and that happened last week. So expect a memo out to all special ed directors very soon with a lot more information around what this process is looking like. And then I wanted to let you know too that on Monday this week, a statewide stakeholder team met to really think about what are the supports, what are the tools, what are the resources that AEAs and districts are going to need, to help them think about this, to help them think about how do we have those conversations, how do we facilitate those conversations through IEP meetings around students meeting 4333, who maybe typically weren't on that track, or who were more typically graduating through their IEP. And so just know that there's some more resources, tools, and a planning committee working on that. Kim Kirshner is the contact right now for that committee, and I've listed her email there if anybody's interested or has any thoughts or ideas that they want to share with that group. You are welcome to contact her as well. So let me stop there because that was kind of a lot of yapping to see if anybody has any questions that I can answer at this time, because like I said, since it's up for public comment, really it's just informing you that of the intent and what the language is there. But if there's any questions I can answer, I'll take those now around that graduation change, the change in the language that is all based on the amendments to IDEA through ESSA.
Hi, Amy. This is Ron Russell, and you may not have the answer to this at this stage, but one question that I think a lot of people will have is, as you said, the 4333 would be non-negotiable, but that would refer to specific coursework. So I know a big question people will have would be for students that are working on modified core curriculum through the Iowa Central Elements, kids that would have severe and profound disabilities, will there still be an avenue for delivery of that kind of core curriculum to count for the 4333? Do we have any sense of what that might look like?
Yep, absolutely, Ron. That was a big part of the conversation with the group on Monday. And the short answer is yes, there absolutely will continue to be an avenue. It is definitely the vision of, Barb Guy, our Director of Special Education, as well as the other folks here at the DE, that diplomas are important, right? Diplomas are important to kids. Every student needs to have the opportunity to earn a diploma. And so I want to dispel any concerns that students who are on alternate assessment or are progressing through the essential elements, that they would not have an opportunity to earn a diploma. That would be absolutely false. And we are working right now on the guidance around that and what that could look like and how to help districts in that process. Okay. Anything else on that part right there? I just see something in the chat. I'm looking real quick. Can a student still graduate from their IEP goals and not receive a diploma but a certificate of achievement? In Iowa, we have a diploma or not a diploma. There is not a different avenue, a certificate of achievement. And so I don't want to speak too much about that because I know that that's part of the memo. So if you can just hold on that, you'll see a little bit more about that. But really, there is just one diploma for the state of Iowa, not a certificate of achievement or other ways like that. So, but again, that'll be clarified a little bit. I think that'll be more clear in the memo that's coming out from the DE. And like I said, I really promise you, I think I told you the last time that I would have that really soon for you. So I hate that I'm still here saying I'm going to have that really soon for you. These are things that are not within my circle of control. But I do know the memo is finished, and I know that it was waiting for this, the state board to go ahead and make their recommendation to amend. And so I know that I expect that to be released by Thomas or Barb any minute or any day now. Okay, so then the next, just a real quick update on the specially designed instruction work through the SPED. I wanted to let you know that the modules, we have 4 different modules around specially designed instruction that are available to anyone who's in the grant or outside the grant on AEA Learning Online. And the 4 modules are, there's an overview of the SDI framework, and then there is a specific module for diagnose for instructional design, a specific module for design for instructional delivery, and another module for deliver for student engagement. And so there are those diagnose, design, deliver, and the overview module available to anyone who would like to access them or engage in them at any level. There's no cost, and they are on AEA Learning Online, and they're available. If you just search specially designed instruction in the course catalog, they all pop right up, and you would be able to enroll in those or use those in any way that you would want to with your staff. We wanted to get those out there because it's a little bit more information. It's certainly not a deep dive. I don't want to indicate that this is a comprehensive learning package. It is definitely more overview, surface level, a bigger picture look at what the SDI framework is all about. Obviously, the deeper work comes through involvement in the usability sites and in the grant. So, but it's available. And if you have questions or have difficulty accessing those, feel free to let me know. Also, the website, the SDI website, actually, I believe it's launching December 1st, Friday, but we will be sending a link out for that. And that's just there's a public-facing page that will have news and blogs and some teacher testimonials and video and some of the happenings around the grant, just to help people stay informed of some of the work that's going on. It will also contain a resources page that are resources for people that are not necessarily connected in the grant, but just might want to be accessing some of this work around the framework. And so there'll be some backside pages that are password protected for those participants within the grant that contain some of the materials and resources that they need specific to their work. But there will also be resources and tools, foundational materials available to the public. And so that's launching December 1st, and so watch for a link for that. And then the only other thing that I've linked to, and we don't necessarily need to open them up or talk about them, but those last two links under that update are, there's an SDI overview document, and David may have already shared that with you because it was shared with directors, but it is really just a big picture of all of the strands, all of the different sites, different AEAs that are involved in this work, who's engaged in the work for the year 2017-18. So that's what that is, just an overview of what it looks like this year. And then a copy of our current revised SDI framework. And I included that because we revised that and have a new version that we are using as of August this year. And I know that there's some old copies out there that are a little bit different, because based on the usability site feedback, based on the work with our teachers and our teams and our coaches and our AEA staff, we've made revisions. And so I want to make sure that everybody's using the most current version if you're referencing it with your staff. And so there's that link for what's the current revised SDI framework. Okay, any questions on that at all? Okay, it's exciting work. It's really moving forward. We've got a lot of momentum right now. Continue to refine our practices and get better and better. We're continuing to think about ways to align our work. You may hear some news about a new team that's starting in January around the SPED, which is the Alignment and Expansion Team. I know there's actually a few people on here today that have been invited to be a participant in that, or that have been asked for permission for your staff to be participating in that. And really the purpose of that team is to help give some oversight and some guidance as we prepare now for continued expansion and move towards scale up at the end of the grant. We want really a lot of stakeholder input and advice and oversight for that. So that's what the Alignment and Expansion Team will be beginning to work on at our first meeting in January. So I'll be able to give you more information about that later. Okay, and then these chapters, right now, chapter 103 has, of course, been in the news quite a bit, and there continues to be cases brought up and investigations and some concerns around chapter 103. And so I thought it was just, these are just resources for you. I'm sure they're things you maybe have already seen or have. But on the DE website is that top 10 points to remember around chapter 103. And so it's just maybe good reminder information to you as you continue in the school year. And really, I think that one of the key points is make sure that you have training, ongoing training for your staff, and that you've documented that training. I think that's real important. And as well as the other points that are within that. And then I've just attached the actual chapter 103 administrative rules. I can tell you without going into very much detail at all, because I just know this much, that there's actually a group of attorneys, I think 6 different attorneys, that are working on a petition to make some amendments to chapter 103. Now that's all it is right now is dialogue. And I shouldn't have probably brought it up because I don't know what those specific things are, but I always like to keep the field knowing that some things that are happening. And Thomas just shared that with me this week, that there are some potential proposal for changes coming around chapter 103, but I don't know specifically what those will be, but I'll definitely share with you more as I learn. Okay, any other questions around those resources? Okay, and then I just wanted to share with you 2 things that'll be upcoming that I plan to talk with you at your next meeting. And that is, we're beginning to really start to map out what IDEA, differentiated accountability, or IDEA DA will look like. And so I plan to share with you at the next meeting some of those data elements that we will be looking at to assign the support levels, and some of what those support levels will look like for districts as they are assigned through IDEA DEA, which is still slated not to occur we're still in the development stage of that, so we're still looking at probably 2 years out for that. But I do want to share with you kind of the thoughts and get some feedback on some of the data elements that we are proposing for that differentiated accountability data collection. So I'll share with that next meeting. And then also I'll be sharing at the next meeting, we're working with a vendor on a special education reference site, a website that actually includes all of the federal and state special ed legal codes, the policy information. It's just a one-stop shop for like you to type in, like say confinement and restraint or any other topic, and it will help search for you and bring up the code on the topic that you're looking for. And so we're working on the user manual for that right now. I think it's going to be a really helpful resource. I remember when I was a special ed director, I was constantly flipping through the Orange Book, searching online, trying to find things, and this is definitely more user-friendly and I think should be a good resource for you guys. So I'll be sharing and we'll be unveiling that definitely by your next meeting. Other things that you would like to see or hear about, have me bring back to you, or things I could answer now for this team, this group? Okay, that's all I have right now, David, unless there's something else that you wanted me to address.
I'm just curious about that last item. Is that LRP you're working with on that, or another vendor? The website, I'm sorry.
You know what? I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not on that project. I don't know. I should. You know what? No, that's not the right vendor, because I've heard the vendor's name. That's not.
That's not it. Okay.
I can't come up with it right off my head right now.
Because we provide, that the LRP special education is provided to our local districts, so it'll be, ours might be a duplication. It'd be better to have one that's more focused on Iowa. So
okay,
be interested to see how that looks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Amy, for joining us. Ron, I think you're next, aren't you?
Yes, great. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I wanted to just take a few minutes, and this should be a brief update unless there are questions. We wanted to provide an update on the AW case and the implications and a few of the steps that we're taking as an agency to address those implications. Just a quick review. Most of you are familiar with this, but the AW case I'm referring to was a due process case that occurred in Des Moines within Heartland AEA, and it was a situation of a student where a number of outside evaluations pointed to dyslexia, but numerous evaluations within the AALEA indicated the student was not eligible. And so ultimately the finding was that in the due process case was that there was undue the charge was that there was undue restricting of the eligibility criteria. And again, just for the sake of a brief, these links are all available in the agenda, but just a quick reminder, what I have up on the screen here was the order of relief, and this happened back in last March that came from the judge that dealt with the due process case. There were numbers 3 and 4 that you see there had to do with reimbursing parents for out-of-pocket expenses and attorney fees, but the biggies that impact us in terms of child fine were 1 and 2, and you can see number 1 had to do with this making eligibility contingent upon a severe discrepancy when compared to age or grade-based standards. So that was that idea of unduly restricting the eligibility criteria. So the claim was there's other ways that a student with a learning disability or dyslexia, we might see that, as opposed to solely focusing on a severe discrepancy, in this case in the area of reading. And then number 2 was also an implication that we, for us, and that was the idea that we should not say that a student is not eligible just because their needs could be met within the capacity of general education. So that was kind of the second implication. And so this, what you're looking at, came from the judge. And then back in September, the Iowa DE sent out an official memo basically addressing the AAs in the child find process. And you can see the number 1 and 2 on the screen right now, telling us that we should not do those things that I just noted, as far as focus exclusively on a significant or severe discrepancy, and also that issue of kind of reconsidering just because a child, their needs may be met within general education in a more inclusive setting, we should not automatically rule out a disability. So a couple things that are happening we have an internal group that's been kind of working on the process and trying to think through what are the implications for us as an agency. And so we have had opportunities to meet with staff that are in charge of child find process. Coming up in early December, we have an internal leadership group that's going to be working more on kind of looking at the evaluations we have out there, looking at possible changes, because there's this we basically have a focus right now of de-emphasizing the part of the educational evaluation report that focuses on a severe discrepancy, and also taking into account a profile of strengths and weaknesses, and looking more at diagnostic achievement kind of information. One last thing I wanted to point out here, and also linked in your agenda, a little handout here that just shows one thing that that is happening in the actual programming of the forums. So the educational evaluation report that is produced for eligibility meetings, starting December 1st, there are a few small changes that are happening because of the implications of AW, and you're seeing that on screen right now. In our discrepancy portion of the report, you can see a little picture here that shows area of concern. We would still have, what is our data source, when was it assessed, what's the expected performance, and what's the individual performance, how did the student do. The discrepancy column is being removed. We had gone to de-emphasizing that, but the programming will take that out now. So we're still presenting data that lets us, frankly, lets us compare students to a standard, but this column being removed would de-emphasize that idea of solely looking at discrepancy for eligibility. And then down here, the second item that you can see on screen here, the very last question that had been on the EER, you can see that which of the above needs, referring to all of the EER, if any, will require services and supports that exceed the capacity and obligation of the general education program and resources. That question is being removed. The reason is because of that kind of challenge in the AW case that implies that just because the services a student might need are within the capacity of general education does not automatically mean that we should exclude them from eligibility if we have data to support a disability. So that will be removed, and you can see down here just a generic statement is replacing that, and it just says the evaluation team will meet to review the full and individual evaluation results and make a decision. So those are two programming changes that will happen on the form itself for eligibility, for the eligibility reports. Our staff have been notified of that, and that is one thing that is happening. So I will stop there. Are there, unless there's any questions, we just wanted to kind of provide you with an update of some things that are happening related to the AW case and those implications.
Hey, Ron, this is Ann Gigstad.
Hi, Ann.
My question is just, if their needs are being met in the gen ed setting, how does that look on an IEP? How do they do have a disability. Say, we may have a student who has a disability of autism. They even have a medical diagnosis, but the supports and services that are in gen ed are meeting their needs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we always want to do least restrictive environment. We're not going to pull them out and provide services outside of gen ed. I guess, how does that SDI look on an IEP?
Boy, Ann, that's an excellent question. and the truth is that that's one of the questions as we continue to work internally on, what does this look like that we're going to have to answer. My best answer at this stage would be that would probably look like, potentially reverse consultation model or a co-teaching model. So in other words, if a student doesn't need, let's say, for example, the evaluation determines that a student does not have needs that require them to go to intensive SDI, but there might be need for some collaborative planning with a special education teacher so that could be delivered in the gen ed setting. To me, that's probably how that would look.
Okay. Would you have a goal? You have to have a goal, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's because ultimately that's where this case does bring in some interesting factors. The whole crux of needing special education does have to do with needing specialized instruction. But I think in this case, the challenge was just sometimes that instruction may be in a more general education setting, but I think we still are talking. I know we're still talking about requiring the services of a special education teacher for an IEP to be written.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no other questions, we can move on to that next item.
Thank you very much, Ron.
All right. Terrific. I'll go ahead and start with the next item. Ron or David, unless you had something that you wanted to mention. I wanted to talk a little bit about SDI, and hopefully you're seeing my screen, which is the agenda. And I wanted to link it a little bit to what Amy Alfrey mentioned earlier, and the SPED SDI stuff that's being developed by the state and a group of really fine people around around our state is separate in a way from what we're doing in our agency. Our agency actually does have some usability sites, which Amy mentioned. I think we have 4. Possibly more now. I'm just not quite connecting with exactly how many we have. I know the ones that are out of my region. And I will tell you that in those schools, the usability work is going on and producing some really nice results. What some of you are probably familiar with is that we got on the SDI boat several years ago, starting with literacy for students in grades 3 through 5. And in doing so, we took a real practical approach and started to delve into it with our own research. So it's not that both efforts are not aligned. Thanks, everyone. I'm seeing the fact that I didn't make that SDI thing successes. Hang on, let me change that. Let me get up to that. I'm going to go back. It's not that our work isn't aligned, it is very much aligned. It does look different in the practical approach to it. But basically, if you look at the definition of SDI, here it is out of procedures. And specifically, if you look at number 1, specially designed instruction that meets the unique needs of the child that will result from the disability. When we think about those unique needs, those are the kind of needs that we address in an EER that says, you know what, this student needs more than what is happening in the general education classroom. And we know what the need is by all of the assessments that are done. And we know how the need is changing by the progress monitoring that goes on. So in addition to that, we also want to make sure that our specially designed instruction helps students have access to Iowa Core. So we have this unique portion of our weighted matrix called collaboration. And if you take advantage of that with integrity, you'll find that that collaboration with between special education teachers and general education teachers can really help align the experience that a student has in a classroom. Let's say, for example, it's literacy. A student has SDI literacy. They might have 30 minutes or 40 minutes. In addition to, they have a general ed literacy class that might be 60 minutes or 120 minutes. Potentially, that student might be getting 2 different reading classes in a day. The collaboration part of that IEP helps us really pay attention to what the students' needs are, where we can address them maybe in a smaller setting with a teacher who has some specific strategies, and by sharing that work with the general education teacher so that student has more of an aligned instructional experience in the area of literacy.
Carrie,
Yes.
This is Pat. I don't think we can access it yet.
Right. Those are successes. I'll get to it. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one question that was brought up by the advisory group is, how do we know? How do we know how much time a student needs? And that's a really great question, one that's really tough to answer. Your progress monitoring, as you go through that and you analyze the progress that a student is making, you'll be able to determine if this student isn't making the kind of progress that we would expect, we may need to increase the time of instruction that we're providing for this student. So that might tell you that you need to increase it. I will tell you quite honestly, at least with our SDI literacy group, most of our folks settled on about 30 minutes of SDI instruction in addition to what students received in a general education classroom, mostly because that's what was available. And a special education teacher might have 3 or 4 students from 10 to 11, and they could address one student from 10 to 10:30 and 2 more who had the same needs from 10:30 to 11. And so it really became a question of what resources were available. That might get you a good launch to a student with SDI. But the thing that really is important is that as you see the student progressing or not progressing, that would help you determine how much time, because you'll see from the analysis of that progress monitoring data that the instruction is or isn't effective. All right, so what I wanted to share with you in this Google Doc, and I'm gonna let you know that it is, let me change here, access to it. Anyone with the link, so I just changed that. So you may have to refresh. Looks like some people are getting into it. When I asked for some successes for SDI literacy and SDI math, which all of you out there are well aware that that's something that is a big initiative for our agency. In fact, we have specific goals around closing the gap using SDI literacy and SDI math. Most of what you'll see here are experiences coming from the staff who serve in the schools out of my regional office. So the first one, as you read through that, that's talking about a student. And as you read that, I think I would draw your attention because it's probably the piece of information that is most familiar to everyone is in the 3rd paragraph. It starts out with his Iowa assessments show even more promise. His national percentiles grew from the 13th percentile to the 21st percentile to the 43rd percentile over the last 3 years in grades 3 through 5. So the 2 paragraphs ahead of that describe some of the specific skills that this student was learning along the way. So even though we may look at data as a large group, each piece of data represents a unique individual. That's why specially designed instruction is really the magic that helps a student become a better learner. And that's why we pay so much attention to it. Even though we do look at big cohort groups of data, we really do key in on what's happening for individual students. The narrative in red, if you look at about the middle of the paragraph, it says an oral reading assessment This kiddo improved his accuracy from 59% last fall to 92% this fall. And the rate is still a concern, but look at the next steps. The rate is still a concern, right? But they're meeting with the parent and the special education teacher to discuss some possible strategies. That's why that progress monitoring information is so important when we look at specially designed instruction. That tells us whether it's working or not. If you look at the parts in green, yep, you're right. There are some schools that are named, but I think it highlights how SDI, how it plays out in every school is a different story, and that's really the beauty of it all, is that, and what's cool about it is I get to see all of this. So be prepared. If you want to tell your own happy SDI story, I think everyone would love to hear it. You can see what's happening in Red Oak and in Shenandoah, at Fremont Mills, and in Sydney. And then I wanted to highlight also, this one I thought was particularly interesting. I know Ann mentioned an autistic student earlier, and sometimes those kids are the hardest to figure out. And this particular student had been hesitant to do math in the past. Well, I can think of lots of students, autistic or not, that are hesitant to do math. And he was observed this year to be extremely engaged in the lesson. And get this, he told his teacher, "This is a good job for me," before each and every one of his independent problems he completed. You know, what an awesome, uplifting confidence builder when this kid is, you know, is using this, the special instruction that's provided for him, and he's making gains. And then the last one is really about a teacher's success. And that's really, I mean, what do we want for our staffs? Is we want our staffs to feel empowered to make a difference in the lives of kids. So I'm going to go back to our agenda, and I would open it up and invite anyone to share, quickly share a success story that they have. I'd love to hear from someone. I have excellent wait time. I would invite anyone who's perhaps in the SPED part, if they would like to share some of their successes. How about any questions? All right, Angie, it's 9:45, you're up. I'll stop sharing.
All right, thank you, Carrie. My next piece of the presentation piggybacks a little bit onto what Carrie was talking about in terms of progress monitoring. So I'm going to share my screen with you as well. This was a request from the small group that helped plan today, and unfortunately I was not able to be there, so I hope that I'm capturing the gist of what you were interested in. The question came about, you know, in terms of how do we easily look at progress monitoring as perhaps a principal, superintendent, SPED coordinator. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with how you can do that a little more easily than going into each student and then clicking on the goal page and clicking on the graph, there is a way that you can do that through the Web IEP system if you follow this process. So obviously you have to log into your Web IEP account, but under the student list, there is this new, and this happened, gosh, maybe last year or even the year before that sometime, this building graph list link. So if you click on that, that link, you will see something that looks like my next picture, and there will be a drop-down menu called Choose a Student. So if you do that, every student in that building will be listed. And so you can pull up student A, you know, Angie Hance, and you will be able to scroll through all of the goals that Angie Hance has. So in one glance, you can see all the goals for each student. Then you can choose another student, and all of their goals will pop up, and you can scroll down to see all them. That's really probably the easiest way to access goals for a student if you want to look at, you know, want to spend a little bit of time just going in and seeing how things are going in your building or in your district, that would be the recommendation that I would have, is to go through there and then look and then see, are there questions that you have? Then you can jot down your questions and the student and the teacher and just kind of see, you know, when do I need to meet with that teacher to have a conversation? One of the things that you can do as you're looking at those graphs is to see if the data is up to date. The procedures talk about a minimum of every 2 weeks, although occasionally you'll see an IEP goal written to where data is going to be collected weekly. If you have a service that is less frequent, for example, sometimes our teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing only see students once every couple of weeks or even once a week, and so their data collection might be longer than a 2-week period. But one of the things that you should be looking for as you're reviewing these IEPs is the teacher collecting the data as often as the IEP says, and is the teacher keeping the data in the system up to date? And up to date is relative, but I would think that within, you know, every 2 to 3 weeks to make sure data is updated in the system. If your data is not updated in the system, you can't really make good decisions about the progress or lack thereof that a student is making. And you can't make those phase change decisions if you don't have up-to-date data. So after a certain number of data points, you'll start to see a trend line will form, and that will also give you an idea of how well the student's progressing towards meeting their goal. Also, you could look at, are there 4 or more consecutive data points above or below the aim line? And if there are, you'll see a cautionary note, as you can see in the top of the next page, where B, if 4 consecutive data points are above or below the aim line. So this will be something that you would, I just randomly took this graph out of an IEP that I found. You can see in the previous school year, there were a lot of data points above that aim line, and it did not appear that anybody was reviewing this data. There's no indication that data was reviewed or no change. There was no indication that you know, the goal needed to be more stringent, or the criteria set needed to be higher for the student, or that the student was succeeding enough that maybe this goal could be stopped and a new goal in the area could be formed. So what I see on the left of that is of concern that it does not appear to be any review of the data. So what you would do as an administrator would look and see, are there, you know, 4 or more consecutive data points above the aim line, and is the teacher looking at that and making decisions about what to do next? You can see now in the fall, so the right-hand side of the graph, you can see 4 data points above the aim line, and the teachers put in their data reviewed, no change. And that's okay, but you would not want to see that data reviewed, no change, data reviewed, no change, data reviewed, no change, time after time after time, because that really doesn't tell, that really doesn't give the impression that a lot of good thought is being given to that data, that something needs to change. Again, this student has been above the aim line for, and I don't have the dates down at the bottom, for the better part of probably 6 to 8 months. So is it time to look at a different goal for this child because they're making some really nice successes on a consistent basis? So those would be 2 things that you could look for. One is the data being collected as often as it's supposed to be? Is it being entered into the system in relatively frequently so you can make decisions about the data? And thirdly, are decisions being made when it looks like the student's making a lot of progress or not making progress? And I learned from Carrie's that there weren't a lot of questions or discussion, but I did have some discussion questions here. My questions to you, if anybody would like to respond to any of these: how often do you, as an administrator or a coordinator, review progress monitoring data to ensure it's up to date and that instructional changes are being considered? What does your review look like? What other things do you consider as you review? And lastly, how do you or others support teachers in reviewing and analyzing the data? Sometimes I feel like, and I've heard that it's kind of I'm a lone ranger. I'm pulling up all of my students' IEPs and looking at their data. I'm seeing that he's not making progress, but I'm not quite sure what to do next. And I wish someone would look at this with me on a regular basis. So how do you or others support teachers in reviewing and analyzing the data so teachers can have support, not only in recognizing the need for change, but also in identifying what changes could be made to support student progress? So I would welcome any comments or thoughts about any of those 3 discussion questions. And I'll keep it on sharing right now so you can see those. I have good wait time too.
Andrew, I can share. This is Brittany Bills.
Hi, Brittany.
Hello. So at Missouri Valley, we, a couple years ago, we actually started monthly meetings. And so they're used for a number of reasons. One, we use them just to think ahead about IEP dates and kind of get things tentatively on the schedule because we all get very, very busy. So it kind of keeps us on top of those. Then the rest of the time is dedicated toward conversation around how are kids progressing, who are some students you're concerned about, who are maybe not making progress, what instructionally have you done with them, what other things might we consider, and do we need to consider increasing time? So we, at least on like once a month, sit down and try to have those conversations. It is up to the teachers, though, to bring students. I mean, I will say one practice we probably could improve would be physically looking at data. So it is up to the teachers to bring students up at those conversations right now, but we certainly could consider, making changes around looking at data. I do know I want to work with my teachers on getting better about phase changes. I would say that that's a practice that we are not good at. And teachers don't know what they don't know. Right. My teachers might make a change in instruction and implement a strategy and not even think to put that on their progress monitoring, graph as an instructional strategy change. I see a lot of materials changes, those types of things, but, we've had some good conversation about, implementing different instructional strategies. And I'm like, those are things you guys need to put on your graphs. I'm like, those are the things that are going to tell us this worked or it didn't work. So those are some conversations we've been having.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I do know that there are some similar practices going on over in my neck of the woods. And, with some teachers and with some AEA staff and principals. So that team approach to review data and strategize and problem solve, that's helpful and beneficial for everybody, not only the teacher, but the student as well. So, it does take a village, and I would suggest that it takes a village to support a special ed teacher in reviewing the data and thinking about, changes that could take place. So thanks for sharing that.
Angie, I would add one. I get to sit in on regional office SLP meetings they have about every other month. And so our SLPs get together and they talk about, they set it on an agenda, and on that agenda, much like Brittany was talking about, some tough cases, things that they're not quite sure about. So they get to access, because they've looked at progress monitoring data, they say that they're not making gains. So they get together and they say, I want some other eyes to take a look at this. Tell me, what could I do differently? Help me spark this kid's progress and make sure that he's making, or she is making, ambitious growth. So the value of doing it collaboratively is that you get another set of eyes and some more brain power behind it.
You bet. Thank you. And that kind of segues into the next section. Another piece of progress monitoring that we talk about sometimes is reporting out to parents. And I know all of you are aware of bullet number 1. Progress updates are supposed to be sent out to parents every time the school reports progress on general education students. And usually we think about that at parent-teacher conference time, at the end of the semester and the end of the school year. Occasionally there might be a building or something that reports out more often than that. But just something to think about, because my time's almost up, is that I got a question here. What evidence do you have that teachers are making sure that the progress monitoring information is up to date and a report of progress is sent to parents? And typically that's done either by printing out a copy of the IEP goal or completing that IEP kind of report card, if you will, that you can print out from the IEP. So what evidence do you have that those are being sent out to parents? What does that look like in your district? The other piece of the reporting out to parents that I don't see very often, and I think is a really good practice, would be making sure that at an annual review meeting, parents have a copy of that end of IEP graph for each of the students' IEP goals. That's another opportunity to be able to show progress mid-year for the whole IEP team. So you go goal by goal, and you can visually see the progress that the student has made, and that can be a springboard, I think, into conversations about what type of goal might be needed next, or how might we want to set that goal a little more ambitiously. So I think that's a springboard for the IEP team to think about that ambitious progress that Carrie just talked about, and I think we're going to be talking about again here in just a few minutes with the Andrew case. But so what does that look like, and how can you encourage your special ed teachers to make sure that parents are provided and the IEP team is provided a copy of student progress through the graphs at every annual IEP meeting? And I just put a note in there, number 3, that we need to make sure as AEA administration that we share that with all of the AEA staff as well, because I think it's an important piece of information sharing that should go to parents. So we'll be letting our OTs, PTs, speech, and other folks know that this is a good practice to engage in. Any comments, questions, or thoughts before we move on to the next piece?
Angie, this is Ron. Just a quick comment. I just wanted to encourage everybody, if for some reason you don't, as a principal, have a web IEP account, just a reminder, your friendly neighborhood IMS secretary out of each regional office can get you on an account. Districts kind of handle this differently. Sometimes each and every principal has an account, or sometimes the coordinator may, but if you're directly supervising the teacher, you're definitely going to want to have access to these IEPs. And this the report that Angie shared, I think we've learned it from a little bit of discussion that it probably is an underutilized report, and it is a really convenient way to quickly, as she kind of showed with that drop down, to quickly see a list of students in the building, and just with a real quick click, be able to find their graphs without a whole lot of digging into the IEP. So,
yeah. All right. Well, hearing nothing else, I think we have a break now. We'll make the break short, so you're going to get 7 minutes instead of 10. So please be back and ready to go at 10:10.
Before Ron gets started here, just want to, there is a survey at the end of our agenda today. If people would take, it's just take a minute to complete. If you would complete that for us, give us feedback about today's session. It'll be helpful for us as we always try to improve on what we're doing here for you. So Ron, I think it's over to you.
Okay. All right, I am going to share my screen again. All right, 45-day trial outs. When we had our planning meeting, one question came up about this topic, and so we wanted to take a few minutes just to kind of clarify the process. And it does seem like this, when these trial outs of special education do occur, it seems like it does generate some questions periodically, so we just thought we'd take the opportunity to talk about it. You can see on the screen, just in the agenda, I did paste in the code. And so, you know, there are provisions in the Iowa special education rules that about trial placements, and you can see the language there. Prior to transfer from a special education program or service, an eligible individual may be provided a trial placement in general ed setting of not more than 45 school days, and that should be incorporated into the IEP. So what I highlighted there is one, probably a question I get many times a year. We're doing a trial out, and is it school days or is it calendar days? Well, the answer is it's school days. And actually, Web IEP kind of helps us with the calculation of, you know, when the trial will end. I just put a little graphic there right in the agenda. When, you know, if we check that box when we're starting a new IEP, so if we were doing an IEP that's going to be a 45-day trial, and that's how we would do it. It would be considered a new IEP. We check that box. You can see there that says 45-day trial out. And then if we do that, the duration calendar is going to be adjusted accordingly. So it's going to tell us when our trial is up there, and it's going to calculate that based on school days. Okay. So then got a link there. And what I have there is just simply a couple of pages from the Special Education Procedures Manual that talk about trial placements. And let's just take a few minutes to walk through that. It starts out just kind of encouraging you to ask the right questions. You know, if we're considering discontinuing all services, obviously we're going to inform parents of the intent. There'd be a meeting to talk about that. And there's some questions here for you to think through when you're doing that. I should clarify too, when we're talking about a trial out of this nature, we're really talking about ending all special education. You know, that's very different from saying, hey, we've had math, reading, and writing services. The student no longer needs math. That can be done just through a review or an amendment IEP with the data showing that need is no longer there. But if we're talking about a student completely exiting, that's when we would potentially trigger a trial out. And I would say too, just a reminder, you don't have to do a trial out. There may be times when the progress monitoring data is showing clearly that there's no longer a need, and a return to regular education type of exit might be appropriate. An IEP team can decide just to do that exit. So there is not a requirement to do a trial out first, but it's something that a team may decide to do if they're not confident that an exit, it gives them a chance to collect some data on how the student does without services. In this guidance here too, you can also see that I can just highlight up here, a reevaluation is required to complete the trial placement. And the reason for that is because anytime when we look into code, anytime that we're considering completely ceasing special education, we have to do a reevaluation in order to do that. So you can see what I've highlighted there is kind of prompting people when you're initiating a trial placement, we would get parent consent for reevaluation because we know that the end of this process is going to require those reevaluation questions to be answered prior to an exit if that is what happens. A reminder here too, at the bottom of this page 161, during the placement, we're collecting data on a regular basis so that we can continue to make decision making. So, you know, progress, in other words, progress monitoring continues for the students. So that happens, the data is collected as usual, progress monitoring data. And then at the end of the trial period, the team reconvenes and answers that question, is the student ready to exit, to discontinue? And that's when the reevaluation questions would be looked at as well. And I can note too, earlier on, the guidance did say, it talked about getting consent for reevaluation. That could be notification of or consent for reevaluation. Everybody probably remembers that our reevaluation consent form, if we say we don't need additional data, we're informing the parents of the reevaluation. If we need additional data, we're asking consent to do those assessments. So it really could be either one, but the key is we're going to answer the reevaluation questions at the end of this trial process to determine whether or not an exit is warranted. Okay, so that's so you know, just the end of the story is, if the team, after collecting data over those 45 days, the trial out, if the team decides that that student is going to be successful, they can process that exit, and we celebrate. There's a little bit in the guidance here that reminds us of, you know, the paperwork process that happens there. The reevaluation has to be completed. And the system will require a page R. So how that works logistically, at the end of a trial period, and a team may decide we're not going to exit them, we may need to continue because of what they found. But if we're exiting, the system, when we put in that final exit code of return to regular education, it's going to prompt us that we need to complete a page R, you know, respond to those reevaluation questions. And of course, we would do a prior written notice to parents that's talking about the exit. Okay, I'm going to open that up to any questions. So that was just a kind of a overview of what happens when we're doing the trial out. Are there any questions out there?
Ron, Brittany has one in chat, if you want to open chat and read that. Or Brittany, if you want to ask the question.
I recently looked at a student I had because, so of course, his trial out also came at a re-eval time. And so we decided to do a trial out anyway, but the duration didn't change. Like, because I don't know if it's because we conducted it as a re-eval. We marked it 4 to 5 day trial out. So I don't know. It's just interesting that the duration didn't change. The picture shows a review. So I didn't know if it only changes for a review IEP or.
Well, okay. So in other words, this little picture that I'm showing here, I mean, that's just a snapshot.
Yeah.
And with the snapshot I have doesn't have it checked, but no, you would still, I mean, you're firing up a new IEP, and that could be a review or a reeval, or you could do it either way. But well, I guess all I would say is when you check that box, that duration, it's supposed to tell the system that we're changing that, and it's kind of giving you the end date. Are you thinking that did not happen for some reason?
It did not, I'm telling you, it did not happen. Like, so it was a reveal, it was a re-eval IEP.
Okay.
And we have 45 day trial out marked, but it's still, the duration was still a year.
Okay. Maybe you can share with me I'd be curious. Share with me the student information, and we can check to see if there was potentially a bug or something like that. Because I
Okay.
know the intention is that it's supposed to
Yeah.
be a little help that kind of gives us the timeline. So yeah, if you want to share that, we can sure check to see if something went wrong with that case.
Okay, sounds good.
But okay, if there's no other questions, that's all I had on that topic.
Okay, I can get started. I just have a few bullet points there that were highlights from the law conference, and if some of you were there, these might be review, but just thought this would be a good reminder. There's always talk about 504, and every time I go to a 504 session, it seems like I have more questions than I get answered. So 504 is still the same. It's still gray. One of the things that I did get out of it is that it's for any major life activity, not just learning. So a 504, as we all know, falls under the ADA. The IEP follows under the IDA. And basically, Jim Walsh stated that all kids with an IEP actually could qualify for a 504. And we don't want to go there, but just keep that in mind. If a parent is asking for a 504, be careful about how you're responding. The second thing that he said too is there's really only two correct responses for a parental request for a referral. And one is, here's the consent and the form or the procedural rights safeguards. And the other is, here's the procedural rights, and here's a prior written notice as to why we are not going to evaluate your child at this time. There's just those two answers. So he said, just keep that somewhere close to you. Most people know this, but there's no such thing as an expulsion of a student with a disability. They always have FAPE. You can remove them for 45 days for the big three, but you still have to provide FAPE. Related to Andrew F., this goes back to the goal writing and the data that we've kind of talked about a little bit, but every child should have an IEP that's reasonably calculated to enable their progress appropriately in light of their own individual circumstances. So he suggests using this question at all IEP meetings, and I think it's a good one. Members of the team, take a look at the annual goals. Are they too low? Are they too high? Are they appropriately ambitious, which we've heard several times in the last few months for this child, and then have a discussion on that. Sometimes I think we get in a rut and we say, okay, well, as Carrie said before, well, this teacher can offer 30 minutes of SDI. It's not what the teacher can offer and what the school can, we have to provide what the child needs. So that's important to keep in mind. Another point that he talked about is that an IEP is the school's meeting, and you can invite whoever you want. So if a parent comes in and says, I do not want teacher X or teacher Y, that's your call. You can, I mean, if you think it's going to blow the meeting up and it's not going to help to have them there, that's your call. But it's your meeting, so you can bring whom you want, and the parent can bring whom they want. So we need to be sure that we explain what a manifestation determination is, and that's hard, and simplify it for parents, and just let them know that it's not an appeal about that, you know, the incident happened. This isn't an appeal. It's related to the goals that we've got for the child. Was that related to the incident that happened? And then finally, just a reminder, and this wasn't necessarily said by Mr. Walsh, but we've seen lots of times in the BOE newsletters of teachers losing their license because they're not progress monitoring, or they're lying about their progress monitoring. So that's something Carrie touched on earlier, Angie touched on, and I just think every time we get a new BOE letter, there's additional cases. So it's important that we're monitoring progress, and we need to make sure teachers understand the importance of that. So, and not just to be compliant, but is it working? Because if it's not working, then we need to change the goal and we need to help the child. So, any questions? All right.
Yeah, Jenny, I had one. Can you, hopefully I'm not echoing. Can you speak a little more about, there is no such thing as expulsion of the student with a disability. The student is always entitled to FAPE.
There's a case, let me see if I can.
Maybe you can just speak from experience.
Well, I mean, we've had, in my time in Council Bluffs, yes, we've had times where we, you know, the very most that a child can be removed from, say, one was an example was arson, started a fire in the school, and then there were several other things that happened. Removed for 45 days, but we still applied homebound service. You know, we went to the home. You can reassign them to a different school, but 45 days is the very max. And then after that, you need to determine whether they need to come back or if that was still the least restrictive environment for them. Drugs, weapons, and serious bodily injury are the three. But you still have to make sure before you do any of that, before you expel or do anything, that you understand, you know, first, does this child have an IEP? I mean, because I think sometimes you get into the moment and yes, there still needs to be consequences for sure, but they have a lot of protected rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for mentioning that. I wanted to just reiterate that oftentimes if you follow the form of the manifestation determination, which is what would happen if a student had a code of conduct violation, it would ask you about an interim alternative placement. So using the form, walking through the form, it walks you through the process, so you can't really misstep, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Angie, I think you're up.
All right. Just very quickly, if you want to go to your procedures manual, you don't have to do that now, but on page 209 is the handy dandy step-by-step guide to suspension and expulsion. And I think with that statement about every child gets to receive FAPE on an IEP, it simply means that if they have an IEP, you can suspend if the behavior is not a manifestation of the disability, but you still have to provide services. So that was part of, I think, Jim's point with that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about lessons learned. And so hopefully you'll have to tell me if you're seeing the right, are you seeing the lessons learned document? Somebody?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. So this year already for members of our admin team has been a little tricky with mediations involving state mediators and attorneys, heated IEP meetings, and a variety of manifestation determinations. So as we've kind of talked and considered some of the things that have occurred so far this fall, we thought that we would invite you into our little circle and share some lessons learned. So these things, you know, it's kind of the top 10 list. They're in no particular order, but they're things that we thought that we would share with you that might help keep you out of trouble or give cause for thought. So we do think it's important that each time something happens that's, you know, heated, a manifestation determination, whatever caused you to get to mediation, it is good to kind of sit back and reflect on what transpired, how did you get there, you know, is there something I could have done differently? So anyway, discipline. We just had a brief conversation about manifestation determination and expulsion and so forth. But one of the cases that we had this year was a student who was on an IEP for an academic area, let's say reading, and now is faced with some instances a couple of years later of repeated discipline referrals. And had a manifestation determination meeting, and the student, it was found that the behavior was not a manifestation of their disability, partially because behavior was not identified as a disability or had a goal area, or there was no reference to behavior in the IEP. Upon further review, it was noted though that this student had a pattern of behavior similar to what got him in trouble several years later in middle school and in high school. And so, you know, it begins to be problematic when you come to a meeting where you're looking at, well, does this constitute a pattern, when the district probably should have had knowledge that this student had a behavioral disability because of the pattern of behavioral incident reports that had accumulated over time. In this particular case, I think there was probably 10 or 15 incidences of office referrals over a year and a half to 2 years that didn't lead to anything in the IEP. So this caution is be careful of what constitutes a pattern. Be careful of should the district have had knowledge of a disability. And so I would say the last sentence in there is always err on the side of reviewing a case to see if either child find should kick in for a student that isn't on an IEP, that doesn't have a disability, but you see this pattern of ongoing behavior, or if they're on an IEP for one area and the patterns of behavior suggest that they need to have services in a different area. So just be careful about that whole thing. I see there's a chat. I don't know if that's for me or not. Let's see. Somebody else is going to have to monitor that for me. So discipline. The second thing is child find, and this speaks a little bit to what I just spoke of. But make sure when teachers are talking at parent-teacher conferences with parents, and there's report cards over a year or more of a child struggling, make sure that all your teachers, that your principals, that your STAT team members are in the know about what it means to have a disability. If any member of a team suspects that a child has a disability, you're starting to see, again, a pattern of behavior, either academic or actual behavior, social, emotional, etc. When you're starting to see those patterns, then it's probably time to think about, does this child have a disability? We don't want a parent to come back and say, well, you know, you saw this, you saw this, you saw this over this course of time, but yet you didn't evaluate my child for a disability. Jim Walsh, who was one of the presenters at the Tri-States Law Conference, he called those parents that aren't really in the know about how to ask for an evaluation an LSP, the least sophisticated parent. So you've all dealt with LSPs and MSPs, which would be most sophisticated parents. So just remember, don't delay an evaluation if you have a suspicion that the child is a child with a disability. And don't wait for a parent to come to you and say, I have a concern. But if your teachers are seeing concerns with behaviors or academics, at least move forward with some conversations with STAT, with the SPED rep, with your STAT team to make sure you're not missing those kids and get kind of bit later on for not taking a step. Document. Just, you know, this can go with anything that you do, but make sure you're documenting when you have meetings on students, what some decisions are made, no matter what kind of meeting that you're having, because these can be very important for memory aids and as evidence that you are working to support the needs of a child. Disability awareness. Make sure all teachers understand what it means to have a student with a disability in their classroom. In some cases, some of our students with disabilities are not the most likable, and we as educators can kind of put them off because they're not very nice, they don't smell too good, they, you know, whatever the situation is, please remember that those kids, they are probably the most neediest of kids that we have, and probably need the most attention and love, and they have low self-worth, and just those simple acts of kindness can really go a long way for that kiddo and that parent. When a parent feels like, whether it's true or not, when a parent feels like their child is getting shunned and has no friends, and people are, you know, teachers and principals and AEA folks aren't nice to them, then that can create terrible relationships that are hard to fix. So Gen Ed students, all students are Gen Ed students first. And when behaviors are problematic, we all have ownership to work together to support the needs of those kiddos. And sometimes it's tough, by golly, but let's just remember who we're all working for. And we want those kids to be as successful as possible. And sometimes they just need a little extra support and kindness to make that happen. Communicate. Sometimes there's just that lack of communication between home and school, or AEA and home, or school and AEA, and sometimes that can just lead to all kinds of trouble. Try to keep communication productive, positive, and child-centered, and keep that open and honest communication going with folks. And that's a good way to ensure parental or child success and better relationships with those that you have to work with. Number 5, accountability and monitoring. It's so important that the IEP, which is a legally binding document, is implemented as written. And there's no way for us to know if that's happening if we don't understand what's in the IEP and we aren't checking on things to see what's going on. And that could be a conversation with a teacher about, you know, we just had this IEP, we were talking about implementing this, what does this look like? Understanding what strategies in specially designed instruction look like, and maybe it's a program like Rewards or Phonics Boost or Blitz. What does that look like? And if I go into the classroom, can I tell that that's being implemented? Accommodations in a general ed classroom. This student is supposed to have this accommodation. What does that look like in here for you? Just remember, the buck stops with you, and you'll be the one sitting at the table with the attorneys and the mediators if it goes wrong. Been there, done that. Staff training. Just making sure that staff are adequately trained to implement the IEP. It's not enough to say, okay, well, I talked to them, I told them what they needed to do, but do they really understand how to fully implement that accommodation, that strategy, those behavioral interventions? Do they fully understand that? So keeping in mind the complexity of the IEP, the educational level of the staff that are required to implement it, from a bus driver to a cook to a janitor to the special ed teacher and gen ed teacher. What have they verbalized in terms of their need of support? Develop a training plan for those that need it, which encompasses some initial training and follow-up as needed to ensure implementation fidelity. Emails and such. Got burned by this one. Be super, super careful about emails and Google Docs regarding students, parents, and their staff. Don't put anything in that email that you wouldn't want a parent or an attorney to be reading. So that can lead to, as I wrote in there, hurtful feelings. It can lead to damaged relationships. It can also lead to a parent attorney stance that, you didn't implement the IEP, it was as was written, you knew about it and you didn't do anything about it. So pick up the phone, make a phone call, meet with someone in person, but don't put those things in written form and emails. And if you have evidence that the IEP isn't being implemented as designed, make sure you're following up with that person. Someone needs to mute, please. Confidentiality. Breaches in confidentiality can get you into trouble as well. So ensure you're routinely having conversations with your staff. You can do that at the very first meeting that you have in the whole they have special protections. And when a parent hears something at work or at a grocery store about their child that only someone at the school should have known, as I said, there's going to be trouble in River City. And relationships. Everything we do begins and ends with the quality of the relationships we have with others. And those can go a long way to bridging problems at the school, problems with the AEA, and so forth. So as was in the case in several recent situations, we've had the person that's had the positive and trusting relationship with the family. Those are the folks that can bridge what's needed to move forward. So always keep relationships in the forefront of your mind. It can be hard sometimes because we have some hard parents to work with, but keeping that relationship positive, open, and honest can go a long way to circumventing problems that could happen on down the road if something happens, like an IEP isn't being implemented appropriately. So those very quickly were some lessons learned. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments about those, but it takes a lot of time and effort from AEA staff, from LEA administrators and teachers when you have to engage in mediation meetings or other troublesome kinds of meetings. And so these helpful tips will hopefully help you to kind of stay out of trouble in the future. So that's lessons learned. Does anybody have any questions? All right, we are ahead of schedule. Denise, are you ready to move on with the AT presentation? Denise?
Yes, I can start.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Maybe. All right, is my screen up there?
Yep.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, Carrie asked me if I would just put something together to give everybody a refresher on what the AT team is available for. The members of our team are Christy Minnick. She serves all of the Osceola office, Samantha William, the Creston office, and I have the North and South schools. And if Samantha has anything to chime in as we're going, that'd be great. We're available to help consult with teams to make recommendations for students. Where our goal is we want the students to do tasks as independently as possible. Support the PTO and SLPs a lot because a lot of times it's communication devices, writing tools, rely on them for help with positioning and stuff also. We set up trials so students can try things before any purchases are made. Help set up the devices. Evaluate software apps and devices, because as we know, everything's changing very quickly. Provide training for teachers, students, and parents. And we're trying to build capacity at the LEA level, so provide a lot of resources. Our website so just different things here. We have an excellent lending library through the MediaNet. So on this page, there's docs, and you can pull up the doc and see pictures and you out through and try them out. There's just an example that I don't have.
Denise, your audio seems to be cutting in and out, at least for me.
Let me move and see if it is better.
You can achieve your investment goals and hit your investments to help you get them. Call now for your free retirement kit. 1-800-350-9107.
Okay, we'll try it here and see if that is any better. Move closer to my router. But here's an example of our switch items. We have lots of actual switches. We have some communication devices that can be checked out. These all are catalogs and show the pictures of those. Ready to go to the reading tab here. This page has lots of ideas if a student needs symbol support with reading materials. How you can make talking books. There's some links there. We are working on putting together workshops to show teachers how to make some low-tech items. We've had one on how to switch adapt toys. We adapted art kits. In the spring, we're going to do kitchen kits, and we're looking at doing something to show how to make some visual supports. I'm going to jump back up here to this AET and the IEP. It's just a 2-page document that talks about AET considerations in IEP, because every student's supposed to have, at every meeting, have consideration. Second page has some examples of some AT things in the different areas. Wanted to just talk about AIM and show this little short video, because AIM is addressed on the IEP, and lots of times there's confusion on if you should check on it. And this video, I thought was really good.
Reading is something most of us do every day. Apply information, science, and we read at work to do our jobs. Text is all around us, and we use it every day to help us navigate our way through the world. But when a disability makes it difficult to access text, we may need a little help. Fortunately, help is available. Welcome to Understanding Accessible Instructional Materials, inspired by CommonCraft.com. Sometimes children have disabilities that prevent them from accessing print in the same way their peers can. Someone with visual impairment might not be able to see the print in a book. A person with physical impairment might not be able to turn the pages of a book or be in a good position to read. And someone with a reading disability like dyslexia might not be able to figure out what the words really mean. To succeed in school, these students need learning materials presented in a way that works for them. We're going to talk about 2 parts of AIM, the content and a way to interact with the content. First, let's talk about the content. These types of learning materials are called accessible instructional materials. If If elementary and secondary students with disabilities need aid, then schools are required to provide these in a timely manner. If you think your child needs accessible instructional materials, bring it up with your IEP team. You and the other members of the IEP team determine if a student needs to receive the same content as other children in one or more specialized formats. There are 4 different specialized formats available: Braille, large print, audio, and digital text. The right formats are chosen based on how a student will access the information contained in printed materials, which format lets them work as independently as possible, which format will help the student develop literacy skills, and which format will let them successfully participate and make progress in general education curriculum and on IEP goals. You have some information about the content. Now let's talk about ways to interact with the content. The IEP team determines what else is needed. It could be technology, such as a digital audio player, training for students, family, and school staff, accommodations, such as a quiet place to listen to audio files, or specialized instruction to learn how to use audio, Braille, or other formats, coordinated services between teachers, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and others, or support services to maintain equipment and support the use of technology. So now you know a little more about accessible instructional materials, but you may have some specific questions about AIM. There are many resources available to help you learn more. These include Accessible Instructional Materials, AIM, Basics for Families. Accessible Instructional Materials, AIM, a technical guide for families and advocates. The AIM Navigator, a free online tool to help teams make decisions about a student's need for AIM and how to meet that need, and many more. This has been Accessible Instructional Materials in Simple Language.
And one of the ways, an easy way to get AIM materials is through Bookshare, and almost all of our schools have Bookshare accounts, and I have a document that I share. And Bookshare Online Library, they've got 544,000 books currently, and they're always adding. I think I read someplace they add about 1,000 a month. I put together a primary contact list, so if you have some districts inquiring about Bookshare, here's a list of the person they could contact in regards to school account. So we also provide a lot of to teams, just an overview or an intro to AT. We show the most common used tools. So if you have any teachers that would like together and see that, we'd love to show them. We're developing a plan to help with the implementation of reading and writing supports. We see a lot of times that AT is abandoned. We're focusing on Kurzweil 3000 and Read and Write for Google. We have a couple of districts we're working with to help us put this plan together. And I've been in AT for over 20 years, and it's just changed so much. Right now we have so many free and low-cost options available, and we find that when we find a tool for the special ed student who needs it, we're realizing that it's often good for all students. So it's looking more like UDL now. And that's all I have.
I see you talking, Carrie, but you're muted.
I think I clicked on the wrong microphone button. So thanks, Denise. I appreciate your presentation from the AT team, and I noticed, I know that it was difficult for some to hear, so if you take a look and click on those links, that I think you'll be able to walk through some of the services and the supports that are there.
Yeah, I think if you didn't hear me, the link should cover everything.
One thing to consider with AT, especially, is, as I mentioned earlier, talking about specially designed instruction, you might have a student who's having specially designed literacy instruction, and they also go to their general ed classroom for 60 minutes or whatever, or their sophomore English class, but let's say they're reading maybe at a 5th grade level. Probably you might have an accommodation on the IEP for that student to have an adult read or a partner read or have assessments read. Think about using a text reader and how that can help a student be very independent at a much earlier age. It's cheaper than using human resources, and it really does help the student connect to that general education instruction if they have a text reader, if they would need one. So it's a real common accommodation that I think sometimes is just maybe cookie cutter stamped from one IEP to the next, and it might say, oh, this kid always has someone read the assignment to them, or they read a chapter to them, or they read a test to them. Let's think about using some technology to support that student so they become as independent a learner as possible.
And a text reader is not taking place of reading instruction. It's accommodating them in the content area, like Carrie said.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation, Denise. Carrie, I think you're on with the syllabus.
I am. Hello, everyone. Share my screen. All right, so hopefully, Ron Russell, will you nod if you see the agenda on the screen, please? Yeah, boy, thanks, Ron. All right, so what I wanted to draw your attention to was we had talked earlier this year at our face-to-face SPED coordinator meeting and solicited some feedback from you all about whether you as a coordinator would want a credit for the time that you put into this, and there were several folks that were interested in it, and so it was sent out to you. And then also we're bringing it up at this session because you'll see in the notes on the agenda that there's the link to go sign up for that class, to register for that class. If you don't have an account, you have to create one. There is a deadline for that registration, which is December 8th, and this is a 1 credit license renewal course, so it will cost you $70. So those are kind of the 3 things up front that you'll want to know. There's a deadline of December 8th if you need a I don't know if it's going to be easy, but it's work that you might already want to be doing, and you'll get credit for it. And the deadline is the 8th, and there's the sign up link. So I'm going to go into the syllabus and share with you. This is just the syllabus that you'll see when you sign up, and you're welcome to copy it or to print it off so that you have it, or keep it online. But some of this is really just the information that we need to share with those who provide the credentials for this course. But here you'll see it is just a 1 credit hour license renewal. Remember, that's $70. And then you'll see that there are 4 folks listed here, but in the printout it may not list everyone. Ron Russell, Angie Hance, Jenny Barnett, and I are able to help you and partner with you as you do some of the work that's associated with this syllabus. And we'd be happy to do it. It really is just looking at the identification data about your IEP kids. So it's just an initial start. It's a good place to start because next year, we might then offer an additional course that would go past identification and looking at, let's say you spotted some things that you want to look further into, and then we could develop another syllabus. It's a good way to get some license renewal credit out of the way because it's work that you may already want to be doing. As we go down through this, these are some of the things that you'll learn. We're going to take a look at the data around weighted special education enrollment and have the opportunity to do some problem solving if we find some discrepancy areas. And you can work with your regional administrator. I did put in there the special education representative because I know that you're going to see them probably more frequently, and they'll be able to help you out as well. If they don't have the time, don't worry about it. We'll make the time to work with you through Zoom or stop into your schools and work with you that way. It'll give you an opportunity to review and reflect on some special education eligibility standards. That's not something that we've covered in depth for special education coordinators, but if you're not familiar with the special education and identification process, these standards give you a really good overview of what that's all about and the standards that we hold ourselves accountable to as we identify kids to determine their eligibility. We'll also look at your specific profiles and create an action plan to support any change. There may be no change that's needed, but if there is something that you want to look into further, that we'll just put a little timeline together and determine what steps we might want to take. It could just be training. We may also want to look at your most recent district developed special education delivery plan and apply a caseload review and procedures to at least one teacher to reflect on the process and create an action plan to support change if there's something needed. That would happen if there's something that comes across in your data that says, oh my gosh, our level 3 kids are exploding and we don't have enough staff, or maybe our level 3 teacher has way too many kids on the roster. So hypothetically, there might be something that rolls out as you do an analysis of your enrollment data. So here are the dates. We met in August, and I'm going to tell you right now, if there are some folks who say, oh my gosh, you know what, I missed that one in August, don't worry about it, we'll work with you. You're still eligible to take the class. August is a busy time for a lot of people. And then today's Zoom meeting, we'll have another one February 15th and another one April 18th. And then shortly after that, the class will be finished. Here's the rationale for this course offering. As a special ed coordinator, you're the district's designee, and we kind of rely on you pretty heavily. I think the agency relies on you to be a part of our special education communication loop, or a conduit. So you are a lot of times our point of contact, and you are the anchor for almost everything that encompasses a district special education program. A lot of you don't have more than one hat to wear, more than that one special education coordinator hat. And so it's difficult sometimes to remember all the things that that maybe we're asking you to do. So we're just trying to help build capacity, as we said earlier in this presentation, within our LEAs, and we're also trying to build our capacity and really work closely in partnership with our schools on specific tasks that are connected to special education. So the one thing that we want to do with the data that we'll look at is to recognize any patterns of identification and factors that influence that identification in order to conduct child find practices with integrity. You'll see here there's a link to certified enrollment data. And let me bring that up to you because if you're looking through the syllabus and trying to determine if you want to take this course, I want to draw your attention to a few things. I need to move all my pictures out of the way. See everybody's fine faces. All right, so you'll see that there's the 26, this information comes from BEDS, and it's provided by the Department of Education. So this very first tab that I'm highlighting here, or have my cursor on, is the 2016 certified enrollment data. And then the next tab is the 2016 weighted enrollment, and you'll see that that includes all schools. So we have to go through and sort, but it's good to look at other schools, especially those that you know of or have similar community variables, such as yours. You know, something like, you know, a place like Glenwood and Creston are pretty similar as far as, you know, size of school district. October 2016 IEP breaks out the number of IEP students by age. And then we have a comparison of weighted enrollment compared to their certified enrollment. And then you'll see this handy dandy little chart. And these are just our schools in Green Hills, AEA. And the red-green is something that we're familiar with. And red doesn't mean you're in trouble. It just highlights a high percentage of, maybe a higher percentage than you would expect for identification rates. And then as you scroll further, you'll see that there's data from 15-16 and data from 14-15. So, and then that's all presented for you in a nice trend report. So you can kind of take a look at your enrollment trends as far as certified enrollment and weighted enrollment throughout the last 3 years. And then there's another tab that looks at percent of eligible or free and reduced price lunch. So those students who receive that. And then that's just our schools also. So sometimes what we know is that poverty can play a role in identification. It's hard to pinpoint, and it's hard to rule in, and it's hard to rule out. So that's why we know education is so critical. This is primarily the document that the syllabus will work from, that you'll use. And let me get back to the syllabus here. And from that information, we'll just start to look at some analysis. We'll work with you. You don't have to go it alone. We really would like to partner with you as you go through an analysis of your own data, and maybe look at some comparison data of other school districts. Some other resources that we'll pull into this would be special education procedures. There's a link there. You'll see the next link is for Iowa Administrative Rules of Special Education, and then 2 below that is Chapter 41. They are one and the same. There's also Chapter 41 is just kind of a short slang if you want to talk about Iowa Administrative Rules of Special Education. Oftentimes we just refer to it as Chapter 41. Then there's another document, Guidance for Quality IEPs, because we might, you know, start to look at the development of IEPs as well as the eligibility. And as I mentioned earlier, looking at the Iowa Special Education Eligibility Standards. There are some objectives that we've listed there for you. Hopefully your knowledge about the eligibility and identification process increases. You'll have maybe some more information will be presented. You'll learn more about quality IEPs. You'll learn more, obviously, about the identification rates and looking at comparable districts. And hopefully, you know, by working together with either your special education rep, preferably your regional administrator, and your special education rep, we can start to look at how the skills needed to look at eligibility, the skills needed to look at the implementation of quality IEPs, and skills need to analyze the data that we look at for kids in particular. We might even have the opportunity to look at individual kids, so that would be kind of cool too. So anyway, that was my commercial. The rest of the syllabus is information that we need to address as far as course equity information and the Iowa core information, leadership standards, and teaching standards. So I will stop yapping and ask if there are any questions about the course, or anyone think they might be interested, or they might have someone in their district that might be interested. Now, the last time I asked if there were any questions, I didn't have any takers. So I'm hopeful that someone says, hey, is December 8th like a hard pass? Ask a silly question. I want to make sure I haven't been yapping and with my mic turned off.
I noticed on the syllabus, Carrie, this is Lorna.
Hi, Lorna.
Hi. I noticed that it says that the 29th that a review of our data is due.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those dates are flexible for sure.
Okay.
The course won't end until after our last class. So our last Zoom meeting. So as we go through this and our next Zoom meetings, we'll start to present some more information, because that's what we need to do as part of our instruction, and then we'll do some seat time with you all, or with you in your setting or by Zoom.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And thanks, Lorna, for that question. Is that the one and only question? All right, well, it is 11:10 and we are ahead of schedule. No one will probably mind that. We'll go ahead. David, you're up next with some dialogue and questions from the field.
This is the what used to be known as Stump the Chump. What questions do you have? What comments? What concerns do you have from the field? This is just kind of open forum. You're going to make it easy on me today, aren't you?
David, I'll ask a question, and don't presume that I know the answer, because I probably don't. You know, there are some other initiatives going on in the state, in the agency, and I'm just wondering if you can highlight some of those other initiatives, because IEP kids are impacted, or all kids, or all IEP kids are general ed kids first. I'm wondering specifically about the CCR stuff, the college and career ready stuff.
I think you do know the answer to that one. You sit on the team. What would you like to say about it, Carrie?
Well, I just want to make sure that our special ed coordinators know that we are addressing college and career ready. We have a team together, and I sit in on that team, and my voice represents IEP kids specifically from the area of transition, but also looking at transition for all kids, not just IEP kids. So it's kind of a teaser, because I think there'll be some other good information coming out along with some transition information, but looking at IEP kids as all kids first. And that's, I think, a nice transformation of how we have approached getting our kids ready for anything post-secondary. So thanks for letting me, it doesn't say commercial, but maybe it was just a comment. Thanks, David.
You know, the best questions are those that are already answered, Carrie.
Sure.
You know, one of the things that I can share, just very preliminary headcount information, if anybody is interested, our headcount is up and our weightedness is up this year. And I was looking for those data real quick to see it. It was over 100 new special education students compared to last year, and the weightedness is over 200. So that is being finalized as we speak. So that, as I said, that's preliminary data and subject to some change as we clean things up. Any other questions from the field?
Hi, it's Ann Gigstad again. I just have a question. Carrie mentioned transition. Have we gotten any feedback on the work that we did with transition IEPs last year?
Sure, Ann. I will share with you, the comments can be shared with you. There is nothing official coming from the Department of Ed until March 15th.
Okay.
And March 15th is a drop dead date, if you will. The State Department has to report to the Federal Department of Education regarding our transition data by that date, no later than that date. At that same time that they're notifying the Federal Department of Ed, they will be the U.S. or the Iowa Department of Ed will be notifying schools. So there's nothing that I can personally share other than we can look at comments for the IEPs that were taken out of Red Oak. And right now we are instructed to not go back in and fix, if you will, those IEPs. We're to continue on and just try to provide excellent transition services, really focusing on student outcomes.
Okay.
I wish there was something more concrete to share. I don't have it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for asking the question. One last call.
Help follow up on that. I know that they were continuing to work on those data sets and get some information out and get those support levels identified by March 15th, just as Carrie said. But I will follow up and see if I can get you an update on that too.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have come to the end of our agenda. And before you go away, I hope that you do take a minute and fill out the feedback form. It is always helpful to us to hear from you. And also collecting information through that form helps us know who was attending today. And this helps us understand, who our audience is and has been, and see if there's anything we need to do to attract more people if we don't have everybody attending. So please take a few minutes to do that. Also, thank you so much for being here today, taking time out of your schedule to jump in on this Zoom and get updated on some topics and get a chance to ask your questions, have your questions answered. And thank you for you do every day to make a difference in the lives of kids on IEPs. I appreciate it. I'm going to look to my special ed team and say, Carrie, Jenny, Angie, Ron, anything from any of you before we go?
Well, I'll push the course one more time. I hope you've got $70 in the month of December that are extra, and hopefully you'll find the information. It'll be an easy course if you're looking for an easy credit, but it's also informational and it applies to your work. So hopefully it's worth the money.
Yeah, and this is Angie. I'd like to say that I have uploaded a couple of documents into the law conference section. One is the year in review by Jim Walsh. One is an actual kind of case-by-case document that has different headers like child find and behavior and FAPE and 504, and the other is the PowerPoint that he used. The other set of documents I'm uploading are on disciplinary removals from Jose Martin, and I went to his session and found it to be kind of a nice, simple way to understand disciplinary removals for kids on IEPs. So be sure to check back. I'm trying to upload the PowerPoint now, but one will be his actual document and the other will be the PowerPoint. So check back with those if you're interested, and you can get more information from the law conference.
Hi, this is Ron. Just a couple of quick things to add as we wrap up here. I up in the AWK section of the agenda, a couple of you had replied. I had put an older link in there, but I've corrected that, and so there are links that have just for those for you to refer to as needed. The original PowerPoint that we had shared at a special meeting back in October, that's there, as well as the administrative law decision and the DE memo regarding AW. So just a couple of you had tried to go in and I had an older link there, but I've got this corrected for your reference. And then there was one question that came up in chat and I missed it when I was talking about 45-day trial outs. I did respond in the chat, but if I could just take a minute here. The question was, I'm just going to read it. The 45-day trial IEP would always need a goal. I'm sorry, that's my. The question was, someone mentioned that they had an annual review that was also a reevaluation. The student has met his goals. Additional testing indicates he is performing in the average range, but the team decided to do a 45-day tryout since the student has not ever been without special education services. 45-day tryout marked, duration date changed. Does the new IEP need a goal when a goal is not going to be monitored? The answer that I put in there is that yes. I mean, if a team is doing a 45-day trial out, there would need to be a goal and continued monitoring. It sounds like in this case that perhaps the team could have, they may have been confident that they had the data to support an exit without a trial, but they wanted to do a trial just in case, is kind of how I'm reading into that. If you do a trial out, the expectation is that there is a goal and continued monitoring to ensure that students are okay before that final exit is done. So.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Again, please take a second, actually a minute, to fill out the feedback form linked at the end of our agenda. Have a great rest of your day.